Awesome. All right, so I'm Ray, and I'm really excited today to be talking about productionizing open source models. Maybe we could start off with a quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you've experimented with a closed source model like GPT-4. Lots of hands. Keep your hand up maybe if you've used GPT-4 in production. All right, less folks. And who here has experimented with open source models like Llama 3? Raise your hand. Keep your hand up if you've used Llama 3 or open source models in production. All right, significantly less hands. This is currently typical of what we normally see. But a hot take here is that I would predict this ratio would flip. That right now we're seeing a lot of folks productionizing, or we're seeing some folks productionizing closed source models. Here at Fireworks, we're really bullish about productionizing open source models. So I'm here on behalf of Fireworks AI. We're a Gen AI platform that lets companies run and fine-tune open source models like Llama 3 really quickly and efficiently. Fireworks is founded by a team of AI veterans. So our CEO, Lin Chow, right there, was the former overall head of PyTorch. The name Fireworks is actually an allusion to PyTorch. Lots of other folks here on Fireworks came from other big generative AI companies. I, for example, came from the Gemini API, so this topic of open versus closed source is very near and dear to my heart. So at Fireworks, we know a lot about LLM inference from the PyTorch days, but specifically about real-world inference. So PyTorch powers 50 trillion inferences per day. This is a lot of inference at real-world production scale. So 60% of the market uses PyTorch. And one thing that I want to point out as well is that PyTorch is an open source framework. And PyTorch follows in this proud lineage of open source solutions that are leading to industry shifts. So PyTorch was obviously instrumental in the real world industry shift to AI, and it follows solutions like Kubernetes for the shift to cloud, and we're here at the Databricks conference, Spark for data processing. We believe that open source is going to have a similar impact on the real world industry shift to generative AI. So today, I'll be talking about the opportunity with open source models for generative AI. Then we'll be talking about challenges in productionizing open source models. Next, I'll be talking about the Fireworks AI platform. And then I'll be talking about how to get started on Fireworks. So starting off with the opportunity of open source models. Right now, I'm sure folks have seen a lot of really glitzy, impressive demos in this industry. It seems like every week there's a new conference where there's some new amazing capability. But there's a lot of questions about how much this is actually turning into production and how much this is actually turning to reality. One thing at Fireworks is we want to help make things go from vaporware to affecting millions of users. It's really easy and sometimes to have a cool proof of concept. But when you actually have real users at the millions of user scale, when you have a business model to start thinking of, this gets a lot harder. And we think part of the reason that why we're seeing this gap of prototyping and experimentation versus real production impact is because the way that these models are productionized today. Right now, as we saw in the poll of the room, most folks are productionizing with closed source models. And closed source is one huge model that's served the same way for everyone. This means if you're willing to pay for lower latency, say you have a use case like live voice agents, you're still using the same setup on the same hardware and the same GPUs as someone who's doing batch processing offline and doesn't care about latency. You're also using the same model for all use cases. This is really cool technically, but a lot of times you don't need a model that knows the name of all 150 Pokemon. If you're doing chat, you might not need a model that can do code generation. If you're doing code generation, you might not need a model that does chat. And when you're at the scale of millions of users, these inefficiencies really add up. You have to be thinking about the end-to-end user experience. You have to think about costs at scale. And this closed, overly large model leads to high costs, poor user experience, high latency, and low domain adaptability in production. So going through these in more detail, so first off is high latency. Since GPT-4 and these closed source models are overly large, this means that it takes a lot more time to deliver a response. UC Berkeley had independently benchmarked a standard Llama 3 setup versus GPT-4, and it was 10x as fast. This makes a huge difference day to day when you're thinking about a real user experience. I'm sure folks here have used ChatGPT and other chatbots and generative AI user experiences in the real world. waiting 0.2 seconds versus waiting 2 seconds for a response makes a massive difference. And this is something we hear from a lot of Fireworks customers as well, where they'll run tests with Fireworks compared to a slower solution, and they'll see that having faster response times and a more snappy experience leads to 40x improvements in user retention or overall engagement. And that really matters when you're trying to get an idea off the ground. You want to prove out the best user experience. You want to make sure you have the top engagement in the product adoption. And ultimately, by providing a worse user experience with slower response times, you're leading to lower adoption and lower revenue. The needlessly large models also leads to elevated costs because you're doing more computational effort than you need to. So GPT-4 out of the box charges about $40 per million input and output tokens. Llama 3 costs a little less than $1 on Fireworks. This is a 40x difference. And when you're dealing with production scale of millions of users, these costs quickly add up and they become the difference between what's a viable and not viable business model as you're thinking about prototyping to production. Let's say you're processing 1 billion tokens a day. 1 billion tokens might sound like a lot, but at a production scale, this is really quite easy to get to. If you have a generative AI feature processing 5,000 tokens each time it's used, that's actually not that much when you consider that a lot of these models now have 1 million or 100,000 context windows. This feature, if it's used by 10,000 users 5 times a day, 20 times a day, is already 1 billion tokens. That means that this feature would cost $1,000 on Llama 3 to run and $38,000 per day on GPT-4. That's a $37,000 difference per day and a $13 million difference per year. This quickly makes a difference between what's viable and not for a business model, especially if you're a nascent team or if you're a startup trying to figure out what you can offer in a sustainable user experience. Another aspect is domain adaptability. When you have real production use cases, you're thinking about, a lot of times you need specialized domain knowledge. For example, you need a model that knows medicine or code or law, and sometimes you even need to go one step further, where you need to know code for your internal code base or code for your big enterprise customer. GPT-4 isn't trained on these more specialized domains, or at least I hope it's not trained on your internal code base. This means that what you're providing to users is a more generic and irrelevant response. Whereas with open source, you have the full might of the developer community. You have 50,000 models to choose from for custom generative AI models on Hugging Face, meaning that you can choose the best model for your use case. What's more is that there are a lot of customization options available for open source. So in Fireworks, it's zero additional costs to serve custom or fine-tuned open source models. So on Fireworks, this means that compared to GPT, you're limited to one base model, first. Second, you don't have the same customization options. For example, tuning isn't even available for GPT-4. And then when these options are available, you're paying a premium. So OpenAI charges 2x as much to serve a fine-tuned version of GPT compared to the custom base model. This means at best with a closed source model, you're getting a semi or a lightly customized model that you're paying a large premium to do, and you're leading to less differentiated user results, less differentiated product experience, and overall no moat since you're providing the same experience to all customers. We're seeing these advantages of open source lead to real business and real production value at scale. So it's really inspiring seeing a really cool generative AI demo, but what I find really cool is that we see companies and Fireworks customers productionizing AI to millions of users today. So this is happening across a variety of verticals. For example, Quora is using open source models for chat, Cursor is using open source models for code generation, Liner is creating knowledge agents and assistants, DoorDash is using data processing. But you might be wondering, Ray, if these open source models are so much better for production, why aren't we seeing it more often? Why aren't we seeing the shift already? And I would just take a second too. If you were to think about open sourcing and productionizing an open source model, how might you go about it? For a lot of folks, the answer might not be clear. And I think this Reddit post encapsulates a lot of the challenges, where this user is saying, how are people using open source models in production? Do you have to get your own GPU? Do you have to go manage capacity? Do you have to scale it on your own? And I think this really encapsulates a lot of the challenges of using open source in production for folks. So 3 main challenges that I'd want to highlight. One is a complicated setup. The first thought that a lot of folks might have with open source models in production is to go provision your own GPUs on a public cloud or something, and then next you would have to go and download software to run these models. There's off-the-shelf software that is popular, like LLM. Finally, you'd have to download these models yourselves. And the worst part is you'd have to be spending this time every time there's a model update, every time there's a software stack or a GPU update to go through and think about your whole multi-part setup. This is taking time away from thinking about your users, thinking about your business model and your product experience. The other unfortunate reality is that this setup isn't optimized. So the numbers that I shared earlier, unfortunately, aren't out of the box. These numbers depend on, one, finding the best parts of each part of this stack. So finding the best GPUs, the software stack, and configuring each of these automatic by yourself. So thinking about the best parameters, thinking about the best model to use, and then you have to make sure it works well together. So make sure that the model you chose is sharded well and is distributed well across the GPU and the parameters are well set up. Also a lot of times it's still difficult to get to the same optimized setup. Last thing would be production ready. When you're dealing with scale, you have to be thinking about scaling up and down to the amount of users. You have to be thinking about provisioning more GPUs based off capacity. That's a cumbersome process. It's wasteful a lot of times, and it's hard for it's difficult to do right. If you're using a hosted inference provider too, a lot of times there are very stringent rate limits where you're limited to 30 requests per minute or something that wouldn't be able to support a large number of users. Even still, you'd want features to be able to collaborate with your team in production, such as multi-user collaboration, SOC 2 compliance, HIPAA, telemetry, and you need a solution that can provide all of this so that you have the most efficient setup to deliver the best users with a sustainable business model. This is where FireWorks comes in, where we provide customized, production-ready inference that's able to be set up in an instance so that you can focus on your users. So with FireWorks, we have the fastest serving stack customized to you. From the years of PyTorch experience, we've created the industry's fastest serving stack. So this is the fastest way to host models like Llama 3 and Mistral. We use a lot of techniques like quantization, where you can go from making a large model smaller without quality impact so that you're able to save on computational effort. We use speculative decoding, and that means that we predict typical model output responses so that we can output more quickly. We also use techniques like prompt caching, so we can also save in computational accuracy, computational effort. This chart on the left here depicts the FireWorks FireAttention stack compared to other solutions, for example, default solutions with cloud providers, and it's independently benchmarked to be the fastest option available. But what's more is that we customize this serving per company. So a lot of folks might not realize, but the same 8 GPUs that you might be using for one solution can vary a lot in terms of efficiency and results depending on your workload. If you have a long prompt, if you care a lot about your time to first token, or you care a lot about latency compared to just serving capacity, you can be sharding the model and distributing the model in different ways, or you could be handling the prompt in different ways. And what FireWorks does is that we work with the individual customers to make sure your stack is set up to you, and that really makes a difference at production scale where you're serving millions of users, so that compared to even this chart, you'd be getting 5 or 10x improvements. This means that you have latency results that are only possible on FireWorks. For example, this chart here shows a typical result, a typical ask from one of our corporate customers, where someone would have a latency budget. They would come to us and they'd say, we know that we need to get responses in 1 second or less, or 2 seconds or less to have a good user experience. Only FireWorks can provide these example experiences compared to these off-the-shelf serving stack softwares. But even if you do have a more lenient latency budget, and you're using something that off-the-shelf software can handle, like LLM, the efficiency of FireWorks means that you can serve much more users with the same amount of hardware, leading to huge cost savings. This chart right here of the 3-second cost cutoff, latency cutoff, means that if you're serving with 8 GPUs on software like LLM, you could serve the same amount of capacity with FireWorks. So you can serve 8x the throughput, meaning that you could go from 8 GPUs to just 1 on FireWorks, leading to 70 or 80% cost savings. With FireWorks as well, you can serve the best model for each of your use cases. So FireWorks makes it really easy to serve the customized model to lead to differentiated value. So we have hundreds of models ready out of the box where you can just serve them on FireWorks, no setup required. We also make it easy to use our proprietary models. where FireWorks has proprietary image understanding, function calling, and also image generation models, where we're the only server of the Stable Diffusion 3 model. And what's more, you can further customize these models. So you can fine tune on top of these models using your own data. And the best part is that's the same price to be using hundreds of models alongside each other compared to just one model. So if you want to serve 50 million requests with 50 models on FireWorks, it's the same price than if you were using one model. This means that if you were using a solution like GPT, you'd be using the same model for each of your enterprise customers. But say you're a code generation startup and you have 20 large customers. You could use one fine-tuned FireWorks model for each of the customers at the same price. This leads to sticky, differentiated value, providing something that only you can for your customers for a unique, differentiated experience. In practice, this means that you have a better user experience at a lower cost. We'll take the example of Cresta. Cresta is a contact center AI company where they use FireWorks to power their Agent Assist feature. This is a feature that oversees a customer service interaction and provides an agent with helpful experience when it's the right time. Cresta started out thinking about the best product experience. They needed something that would be able to surface helpful recommendations accurately. So they trained their own model. They trained their own model fine-tuned off of Mixtral, and then they found that this outperformed GPT if you look at the chart on the bottom. They then fine-tuned different versions of this model for their different customers so that they were able to serve a different version of this model for each of their big enterprises. Next, this model was also significantly faster. So they were able to have much lower latency results, which led to better adoption in their studies. And then finally, this was much more cost-effective because it was a much smaller model, and they were able to serve multiple versions of this model at the same price, led to 100x savings in their estimations. You could see the blog post here on your own if you're curious for more information. But this is what's needed to have generative AI in production scale for users with this real, sticky, differentiated experience and low costs. So how might you get started on FireWorks? We make it easy to get started with options for every stage in your scaling journey. So whether you just have an idea or you have enterprise scale, we have an option for you, and we want to be able to scale with you from the start to successful enterprise scale. So starting off, we offer serverless inference. It's the easiest way to get started. We host GPUs for you, and you don't need to configure anything. You can just hit the API the same way you would with the GPT-4 API, and then get tokens back. You pay per token this instance, no commitment, no setup required. Second option would be on demand. If you have more volume, you can configure your own GPU, no paying for boot up times. This is better for unit economics. You can get some more customizations, and still no commitment. You only pay for what you use. Last aspect would be enterprise reserved. If you have large traffic, the best solution would be to provision your own GPUs, and FireWorks can customize the stack from start to finish. And we can also work with customers to personalize everything for you for the best latency and for the best cost. Here, we're taking a developer-focused approach with all these options, where you only pay for what you use. At FireWorks, your success is our success. No commitment required to get started. And we see this approach working in practice with 29,000 developers running on FireWorks since August of 23. And we're the second most used open source platform and the most used open source platform that's production ready. To get started on FireWorks, you can just go to the FireWorks AI website, and we have a UI playground where you can select the model that you most like. So in this example, we're using Llama 3. You can prompt it right here, and what you see is a real demo, not sped up, where you prompted Llama 3, and you get responses, and then you can see the model quality of all the different open source models. When you have a speed and a quality that you like, you can then get code with just one click, and then you can put this into your application. For those of you using OpenAI, you might be happy to hear that this is an OpenAI compatible API, so it's a one-line code change to switch to open source or try out open source. With FireWorks, we're excited for folks to start innovating in production. You can get started on the FireWorks AI website, or you can come talk to us at booth number 8. And you can come talk to us at booth number 8, or come find me afterwards for more customized solution. We're also providing free credits as $20 in free credits to everyone here as a thank you for your attention. We're really excited to start the open source AI revolution. We're excited to be bringing real-world value to folks and to be providing sticky, differentiated value to millions of users at the lowest costs. We're really excited to see what you build with Fireworks, and we can't wait to see what you end up producing. Thank you so much.